Got it.
Good evening, everyone. We're just letting a few more people into the room. So your patience is most welcome. Thank you. I hope you're all having a good evening. It was a gorgeous day today. Holy smokes. I went out for a walk or 2 walks, and it was just glorious. My favorite season. I just waiting for a minute so that no person is left behind. That's the goal here. All right, I think I'll start because what I start with is, you won't miss a lot. So good evening, everyone. It feels like it's been a long time since I've done a virtual presentation. We put a hold on virtual presentations roughly in the spring when the weather started getting a little warmer. We said, okay, we're not going to do virtual. And now here we are back in virtual land. So I feel a little rusty. I hope I don't look rusty. My name is Kelly Greenlee. I am the Community Outreach Librarian here at Prince Memorial Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the virtual world here tonight. Thank you for joining us. We are here for Power in Aging, which is going to be a really interesting talk. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be great. But first, I would like to, when I do these virtual programs, I like to start my presentations just by taking a moment for us to consider, especially today, because we are just coming out of Indigenous Peoples Day. So I just would like us all to take a moment to consider this land that we call home. And I'd like to invite you to offer up a moment of gratitude for the Indigenous peoples who came before us and who lived on this land for many hundreds of years and who cared for and worked the land where we live and work and play every day. So thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Let's see, I'm going to play with your screen for just a little bit here. And oops, I lost you, Don. Hang on. Don't worry. I know you're there.
I'm still very much here.
Here we go. All right, excellent. So I'm going to introduce Don Harden. He is our presenter for this evening. Don is a founding board member of the Maine Council on Aging and coordinates the Power in Aging project, which is Maine COA's new anti-ageism campaign. He's been affiliated with the Catholic Charities Maine for more than 43 years, most recently as the Director of Aging Services. He was co-convener of the Maine Aging Initiative's work group on workforce and the economy, served on the Legislative Commission to study long-term care workforce issues, and represents the voice of older workers on state workforce board. He serves as care partner with his mother, who lives independently and celebrated her 100th birthday this past May. Thanks for joining us, Don. I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Okay. I'm just going to get my slide deck up here. Just give me a quick second. You set up this beautiful array of faces, and now I'm messing with it. So But good evening, everybody. Welcome to the presentation and conversation, Embracing Aging to Build an Age-Positive Maine. I'm really excited to speak with you all tonight. I've done maybe 60 presentations, but this is the first community library group I've spent time with, so this is pretty exciting. And if at any point you can't hear me or something goes wrong, and of course nowadays with virtual, you can lose internet connection. So hopefully that won't happen, but I'll be back if that happens. But if you can't hear or see me, let me know. So this is, as was said earlier by Kelly, thank you for the opportunity, Kelly. It's part of our Power and Aging project, which we launched about a year and a half ago and funded by the Maine Community Foundation. And but just a quick second about the Maine Council on Aging. It's a broad network of over 130 businesses and organizations and older Mainers that advance our policy initiatives. Our vision is that we can all live healthy, engaged, secure lives as we age in our homes and communities with choices and opportunities. And actually on this particular slide, I should say right up front, okay, if you can have the access to these slides a few, after the presentation. So if you're worried about taking notes, you can get the slides. But at the bottom of this particular slide is the link for the Power and Aging project, the Maine Council on Aging. But up until recently, and before COVID, we weren't head on, but during COVID, we kind of felt like we got hit over the head with a 2x4. We observed a lot of ageism and its impact on people that were navigating that that particular issue who were over 65. So we felt like we needed to take on ageism head on, okay? And we decided it was the only way that we could build healthy, inclusive communities and supports that work for people of all ages. And we've actually just recently, and I'll talk more about this later, but we decided, because we just passed our first decade, celebrated our anniversary of 10 years, we decided to dedicate our next decade to ending ageism. So more on that a little bit later. So the formula for the Power and Aging project is pretty simple. We know that ageism is bad for us. It's bad for our systems and actually bad for our economy. And most importantly, it ends up in less support for systems changes needed to support healthy aging. We also know that when people understand their own age bias, and here's a spoiler alert, we're all carrying around age bias. And so if we understand it, we're less likely to act upon it. So we've decided to set up, direct conversations and presentations about how age bias impacts us all, and using those sessions to sort of go from awareness to action on how we can combat ageism. So we've been holding conversations with our Maine Council on Aging members. I get to go to workplaces and talk to HR people about age bias in the workplace. We've talked with media about age positive, age accurate language in their reporting, healthcare about how to not elder speak people when they come in for medical appointments, parks and rec, you name it. And we've had quite a lot of impact from all that. And we also last year set up the first in the nation leadership exchange on ageism, which is a 14-hour intensive leadership training for some of the top leaders in the state. So these are some of the questions that we might get into today. And I'd say we pretty much focus more on these middle two questions. What is ageism and its impacts? And then how can we develop an age positive attitude? And then how can I see and change my own age bias? And once again, I do want to emphasize that I'm not going to necessarily read off all the slides. I might not even hang out on the slide long enough for you to read everything, but you will have access to the slides afterwards. And, as we're talking about aging today, I wanted to share up front a definition of aging, because sometimes talking about aging for a lot of us can be a little anxiety producing. It kind of taps into some of our fears, the 3Ds, right? Fear of death, fear of decline, fear of disability. And I think a lot of that is because in society, we most frequently hear this kind of biological definition of aging, which I have at the top. It is true that biologically things happen as we age, but for this sessions, we're using this fuller definition, which covers all the dimensions of aging. There's a lot of dimensions. It's a process that's psychological, social, spiritual. It's very dynamic. It's multi-dimensional and multi-directional. And one of the takeaways from that definition, it is the one thing that all of us have in common. We're all aging, right? No matter how old we are, it's the one thing we all have in common. And so this definition kind of really gets into that. I shared our questions for today's presentation, but before we go further, how about if I ask all of you a question? We've learned the value of helping people participate early on in the presentations and sharing. So I'm curious to know from you, when you think of an older person, what are the words or phrases that come to mind? So I want you to chat that out. Or if you don't want to chat it, go off mute and shout it out. And Kelly, maybe you can help me keep track of some of the things that I'll try my best to do it. So feeble's the first one, okay? Keep them coming. By the way, Kelly, you don't mind if I admit people. I'm doing it now, right? So
No, please do. Sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what other words of invisible, forgetful?
I'd say also one thing that people think of is that if your eyesight is getting poor, then your brain must be getting poor also. Or if you're slowing down, then your brain must not be working.
It probably works for hearing too, right? you can't hear that well.
Pick a
sense,
yeah,
right?
Eddie. Pick a sense,
stubborn.
Absolutely. Yep.
Wow, abusable. That's a pretty powerful. Keep them coming, yeah. And forgetful of memory, that's often a first one. Experience. Two with experience, which I assume it's more of a positive one, right? So maybe assistance, needing assistance, I assume. Anybody else? Last call. Resilient. That's good. Okay, so thank you for sharing. It's remarkable, even though I had to prod you a little bit, but it's remarkable how quickly we can surface these like beliefs or stereotypes of aging. Oftentimes people don't surface positive stereotypes. You all actually came up with experienced and resilient. That's good. But sometimes all I get in a session like this is all negative. And it's kind of sad sometimes, even some of the things that people say, the stereotypes that come up. And I often hear when it's all out loud, I often hear this kind of like internal dialogue about the beliefs that people are throwing out about older people, but also maybe beliefs about their own aging and their own selves as they get older. But we do carry around a lot of negative beliefs and stereotypes about aging, which can, when activated, can lead us to hold expectations of how we are aging, behave in our capabilities, and how others who are aging behave in their capabilities as well. And this is something that we develop early on, for sure. But what is the effect of holding positive beliefs, okay? Not that people who are aging are feeble and gullible and some of those other things you just said. But what is the effect of holding positive beliefs about aging or activating positive stereotypes? Well, the research tells us that we have the potential to live longer, 7.5 years longer. And if not longer life, then maybe better health span. But I mean, 7.5 years. I mean, what's your reaction to that, right? That's pretty shocking, right? It's pretty cool. 7.5 years longer. And research tells us that people who, once again, live with purpose as they age, live twice as long and had less dementia. And the other thing I would say is, like, I'm a semi-retired guy, so I've continued to work, but a lot of people stay in the workforce or volunteer as they get older. So we who do that kind of know that this living with purpose kind of works. And we also know, if we hold age-positive beliefs, we have the potential to get happier with age. A lot of times you think of older people as lonely and unhappy and living miserable lives, but actually we do pretty well. Even during COVID, people who are aging actually were the happiest people in a lot of ways. So, and maybe you've heard this whole thing of the blue zones. These are parts of the world where there's an unusually high proportion of centenarians. And by the way, in one of my sessions recently, there was a 97-year-old man in the session who told me his goal was to be a super centenarian. He says, "Do you know what that is?" I said, "No." He said, "It's living to 110. Imagine holding a goal like that, to live to 110. But this whole thing of blue zones, the organization that catalogs these blue zones, once again find that people in these particular parts of the world have a high number of people who live at 100 and over, and they've discovered that there are some things like drinking red wine or different things, but it's primarily living with purpose and holding age-positive beliefs and practices. And I certainly can share this report or article. I'm willing to share anything, Kelly, by the way, but there's this article about the new map of life it talks about, but once again, it's aligning lifespan with health span and considering it well span. So it's a different concept. And this is what holding age-positive beliefs about aging looks like. A walking blue zone, right? I always try to work my mother into the presentation somewhere. This is her turning 100 this past May. Now, everybody, if I show this picture to people, they always remark, right? Well, she must have good genes. Yes, she does have good genes, but maybe more importantly, she holds age-positive beliefs. She rises every morning with a sense of purpose, even if it's to like to strip the bed and wash the sheets. She gets out of bed with some sense of purpose and meaning, and she definitely practices healthy aging habits. So if holding age-positive beliefs are so compelling, then why do we activate negative age stereotypes within ourselves when we have the power to activate those age-positive stereotypes? Why don't we all hold these age-positive beliefs? Why are we building a more equitable and inclusive Maine with healthier people and communities and a stronger economy by intentionally addressing age bias in all its form? Or put another way, you got the anchor here, what's holding us back from living our best lives long into old age, seeing we who are aging as valuable contributors to our economy and society, and making those kind of investments in your local communities that support healthy aging and people staying in their communities as they age? It's kind of like, what's keeping us from seeing the whole person, not a person in need, feebleness, or whatever was said earlier, or a frail, vulnerable person, but a person with long lived experience, who continues to contribute to society in a multitude of ways. So obviously, as I said earlier, we see ageism as holding us back and not seeing each other as we all age together. And it's those kind of negative, unproductive stereotypes that you shared earlier about we that are aging, that's holding us back. But the good news is, once again, is by understanding age bias, we can, with intention, build age positive culture. So let's talk about ageism. So here's a global view on ageism across societies. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. It's like the air around us, invisible, often noticed, but we're always breathing it in. We're literally swimming in it. And a lot of times I get asked, well, why quote from the World Health Organization, particularly when we started doing this during COVID? Like, everybody said, well, World Health Organization, they must have their hands full with COVID, and now COVID and monkeypox. But actually, separate from those kind of issues, their biggest concern for the world public health is the impact of ageism. And they actually, over a year ago, launched a worldwide campaign to address ageism. So it's a global problem, and it's pretty significant. So ageism is really three things. It refers to the stereotypes, how we think, the prejudice and bias, how we feel, and discrimination, how we act, directed toward people on the basis of their age. And I have to say, obviously, ageism shows up across the lifespan, but certainly the work of the Maine Council on Aging has been more focused on how ageism affects older persons. And ageism, like racism, sexism, other isms, ageism, called the last acceptable bias in our society, kind of operates through systems within us, between people. And nowadays, whenever you talk about ism, you always hear about a privileging within the ism. So with ageism, in this case, it's the privileging of youth. It's the attraction to youth that's part of it. And on this slide, and once again, I'd be glad to send this to anyone in a sort of a printable kind of version, but it's everything you need to know about ageism on one infographic. This is a structure of ageism and how it exists across multiple levels. And the important point is that at each of the levels of ageism, there's this challenge to become aware of the ageism and an invitation to take action to address it. So systemic ageism is age-related bias across society. And with systemic ageism, it's the cultural messages that we're bombarded with early on and daily that tells us there's something wrong with getting older, something to be resisted, something to be feared. It's the resource allocation decisions we make, which are often unfair, inequitable, and unjust to older people. Like during COVID, there was full funding, so every child had access to a free school lunch, yet older persons were put on a wait list for Meals on Wheels. Age inequity. And it's the rules that we developed that can marginalize and discriminate against older people. So once again, living within that system influences us all. And then once again, ageism shows up at different levels. So internalized ageism lies within individuals, within all of us. Internalized ageism are our private beliefs, our assumptions, our biases, our stereotypes about older people, about aging, including our own aging. And it can be conscious or unconscious. But we know that the mind, the way the mind works is that 80% of our mind works unconsciously. So for example, internalized ageism, and examples of that can be not continuing to go to that yoga class or Tai Chi class, even though good for your balance, and it could prevent falls because you think you're too old. I'm too old to keep doing that. Or it can be at the workplace. It can be that manager that thinks, and this is a big problem nowadays, that all older job applicants are incapable of handling technology. Interpersonal ageism occurs between individuals, and it can affect our interactions with coworkers, family managers, clients, strangers. And it really helps to be aware of how we speak to older persons and the words we use. At the workplace, when you say to somebody, you were late for that meeting. Did you have a senior moment? And one of the biggest myths is about the loss of memory as we get older. But this whole thing of senior moment, okay? Or if you're at the doctor's office or at a bank, for example, and somebody calls you sweetie or some other cute name, that's when we're talking about elder speak. Talking to people in that sing-song way that you talk to children, calling them terms usually reserved for children, infantilizing them, or talking loudly at the doctor's office, talking around them, not to them, turning to the care partner or family member. And that's a real problem. It diminishes the self-worth of the person. It depersonalizes them and results in many cases in not getting good care or the services they were seeking because you're not even getting the story from the person who's right in front of you. So institutional ageism occurs within our organizations and systems of care. It's, for example, not dealing with those hiring practices that disadvantage older candidates, or how a medical practice sets up their services or waiting room. Anything I'm going to talk today about the levels of ageism, mostly talking about internalized and interpersonal, not what goes on in organizations. But here's a kind of an example of how ageism works. In this case, this is at the workplace. You can see that, we start out being shaped to once again value youth, and naturally we bring those attitudes into the workplace, and it shows up as stereotypes and age bias. Once again, it's like the air around us. We're breathing it in. We're swimming in it. And on the next two slides, here are some images of the cultural messaging of systemic ageism. The message, once again, being there's something wrong with turning older, something to be resisted. This whole concept of anti-aging, like an anti-aging ageism cream, right? And it's kind of a tiny leap, isn't it, from this usage of anti-aging terminology to perhaps being against aging people and traits of aging. Of course, it does get a bit complicated. A lot of the health and fitness products, for example, use anti-aging to sell our products, right? We have a product in my house from a show we saw on public TV. It's called Aging Backwards. You think about that, the concept of aging backwards. Sells the product, but it's kind of a crazy concept. And this slide of the cultural messaging, this is kind of what you get bombarded with in the supermarket in line, right? So ageism is pervasive, but at the same time, it's remarkably invisible. I mean, here's two examples of invisibility. These we just got this off the web. You got these two high-minded organizations. One is about abuse, domestic violence, and the other one is about diversity. And what do you see missing? Almost like age is not relevant to domestic violence, but we know people that are older obviously experience domestic violence. So I don't know if you noticed at the very beginning, the kind of the image of and metaphor of the sun is in our Power and Aging Project logo. Kind of reminds us that ageism is often hidden in the darkness, and our call is to bring it out into the light. And I don't know if there's anybody on this session, in workplaces, but there's a lot of activity going on in workplaces about what's called DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. So trying to orient employees to racial diversity, equity, inclusion, for example, and other forms of isms. But we know that only 8% of businesses nationally actually include age and ageism in those same programs. So, and here's a national poll on ageism about the prevalence of ageism. So for people 50 to 80, 82% of people have had experiences with ageism. And so obviously that's going to lead me. I want to ask you all to weigh in on your experience. We usually do this on a poll, but we didn't set it up for this particular session. But, if you just want to chat, yes, no, Have you ever witnessed or experienced age bias or age discrimination, if you're willing to share that? Yes, no, chat? Or shout it out.
I'll share one. I moved to France when I was 51 and I worked there for 5 years. And can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, good. So I was there for 5 years, but what I found out when I first moved there was people were appalled because I was over 50 and everybody there gets out of the workplace at 50. And so they didn't understand why I had been sent, why I stayed. It was very interesting.
How'd you feel with staying?
Oh, well, it was a wonderful experience for me, but I made the best of it.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, as it is, people have to endure the assumption that at 65, you're going to retire, right? So, yeah.
Yep.
I'm talking about 50. So I don't know if anyone else wants to share. I saw a no, I think. I saw a few yeses. Only in trivial ways, like being called sweetie. I have played the old lady card on occasion, though. That's a good one. Thank you, Abby. Yeah. If we had time, we'd want to delve into what the old lady card is. So let me tell you, I mean, usually, I've been involved in, like maybe 60 presentations or 50 something or whatever. And when we poll people, now I'm talking about, I've done it at LL Bean, I've done it at sessions, conferences or whatever. Usually it's plus or minus around 90% that people have either witnessed it or experienced ageism. So it's definitely out there. So okay, moving slides. So it does impact us, but in reviewing the impacts of ageism tells why we should care about addressing ageism. And so I want to talk a little bit about the impacts. But the first thing to reinforce is that ageism has its most severe impacts when it intersects with other bias, ableism, having a disability, which is a big deal as people get older. Often disability comes with aging, racism, and gender bias, and so on and so forth. And so we talk about intersectionality. And what it is just basically a lens for looking at things in terms of the way the various forms of inequality kind of operate together and sort of exacerbate each other, creating multiple levels of social justice. So, for example, and we just participated and partnered with others on a big study about the economic security experience of older women, and what we found is that older women, after years of kind of gender-baked economic disparity, being paid less in and out of the workforce or whatever, retiring, maybe on a lower level of Social Security because they did a lot of caregiving or whatever, living alone, they and higher numbers end up living alone, obviously has a very different experience of income security than an older man. So we get into this kind of ageism experience and gender bias at the same time. So, and once again, that's another thing we can share if people are interested in reading more about that. So obviously there are impacts of ageism at the workplace. What you see this number in the lower left corner, about 850 billion is the impact back in 2018, because we're biased against older workers kind of nationally. And so we can document the economic and personal costs of age discrimination at the workplace and the injustice of it all. People not being able to access meaningful work as we age. But in Maine, it's a particular issue because we're the oldest state in the country, and this age bias is holding us back from solving our workforce shortages by not embracing older workers, because demographically, there's more of us around. Like I'm part of the hot diet demographic. I'm 72. So, and I'm doing what you would hope employers would do is like basically retired, but I'm working part-time. People saw me, as an asset. So there's a big, there is this big opportunity if you have an age positive view, but there's so much age bias kind of holding us back from going after we that are aging and seeing us as part of the solution. 3 or 4 older workers experience age bias over 50. So I think that's pretty remarkable. So we continue to say, why aren't older workers a key part of our workforce development strategy? And when we talk to employers, we kind of give them the summary of the human case and the business case, because it's good for the employer, it's good for the economy, but it's also good for people, so that's that. Similarly, there's this impact on businesses because they, once you saw the magazines earlier marketing to younger people, but there's a lot of us around who are older with a lot of wealth, and so it's always intriguing why they don't market, to we that are aging. There's a lot being written about how do you take down structural ageism, and one of them for businesses is to increase the inclusion and diversity of older people in advertisements and present them in roles that reflect vitality. Usually what you see is people that are vulnerable, frail, whatever. And there's a lot of marketing, obviously, around Medicare and, and emergency alerts and different things. But why isn't there more marketing? Like, I haven't looked at an LL Bean catalog in years, but it'd be interesting to go through some of these things and see how many older people are in those publications. And then this whole thing of the impact of healthcare. I mentioned earlier that the World Health Organization has identified ageism as a major threat to our health, defining it as an important and neglected, what they call social determinant of health. And, obviously they have a lot of data. This whole thing of 63 billion is what it costs the US economy because of ageism. And to be clear, that's coming from both the practitioner side, the healthcare provider side, who is kind of because they're not working with older patients effectively and have their own age bias, they're undertreating, overtreating, or whatever. But it's also coming from the person side, because we're not practicing healthy aging habits and holding age positive beliefs. So it's kind of runs both ways. So, and when we talk about impact, obviously the impact that we learned about during COVID, that more than 3/4 of the people who died of COVID were over 65, along with all the isolation and loneliness and loss of freedom and services. But we certainly learned a lot about the value of aging when there is a health crisis, literally the expendability of older people. So ageism is pervasive, its impact is profound. And so again, the questions are, why don't we see it? Why don't we name it? Why don't we disrupt it? Why don't we challenge it or whatever? But if the benefits of holding age positive beliefs are so compelling, why do we activate the age negative stereotypes within ourselves when we have the power to activate age positive stereotypes? And as I said in my introduction, when people understand their own age bias, they're less likely to act on it. They're also more likely to take positive steps to build age positive culture. So, and so we want to reinforce that the most important action to address ageism and to move in an age positive direction is to get in touch with your own internalized ageism. And so I defined, internalized ageism a few slides back, but here it is again, what it is. And one of the ways to get in touch with your own internalized ageism is through reflection on your own aging. And I wish we had a few hours because we get to do this in the leadership exchange, but you can, there are questions that you can sort of ask yourself and reflect upon. And these are 3 questions from Dr. Tracy Genbren, who's just written a really good book called Ageism Unmasked. And I would love it if we could spend a whole Saturday to sort of small grouping and pair sharing around these questions. But I would encourage you to really reflect on yourself as an aging person and what it means to grow old, and how do we talk about growing old. These are great questions to work with. And just want to reinforce that, this whole thing of like, once you become more aware of ageism, you kind of want to do something about it. Once you become aware of its impacts. But we want to reinforce that, we all have this internalized ageism, but it can be unlearned. But it's not going to happen from an hour from me. It's something that takes a lot of practice and commitment. It also takes an understanding that your age bias has been shaped by a bias system. So this whole thing of like, we really encourage it's this whole thing of growth mindset. Okay, I grew up with all this cultural messaging about aging. I get it every day from the ads or whatever. I hang around with people maybe that traffic and kind of messaging about ageism. But the best way is just keep working on it and do my work here. So, but not be ashamed or blame myself for that. And these are some skills that we recommend in terms of how you can reduce some of that internalized ageism. I mean, the first thing is don't participate in sharing ageist messages. So, once again, if you're at the workplace and somebody starts, sharing messages about another person, just don't join in, or if you're offended by it, call it out. And we all do it, and we're all responsible for our own growth around this. Even our executive director of the Maine Council on Aging, she admits that she constantly, when she gets in a car, if she's going too slow, she starts railing at the driver up above and thinks it's an older driver, right? So we all have this work to do, right? So it's important to not join in and engage in that. And this whole thing about, one of the most important things that I've done is to shift to thinking about us instead of them. Like, instead of saying those older people, I've kind of gotten into this lingo of we who are aging, because it is true that we're all aging. And I'll talk in a minute or so about language. The whole thing of language is really important. This whole thing of calling people seniors, so there's a lot of advantages to using terminology like older persons rather than seniors. And one of the most important things about the internalized ageism is that it's at the root of interpersonal ageism, which occurs between people. And as I was saying earlier, internalized ageism, it can impact our interactions and relationships with others. So here are some examples, once again, of interpersonal ageism. Devaluing someone's ability or discrediting someone's capacity, this thing of elder speak, so that, and once again, I think earlier some people had said they'd experienced it, so it's kind of that whole thing of how did you respond? I've seen my mother, now that I get to accompany her to a lot of doctor's appointments, and obviously, she's 100, right? So, people immediately have these assumptions about her capabilities, and she doesn't hear that well, and she's got a little bit of visual acuity issues and stuff. but she'll be damned if she wants somebody speaking for her. She's going to tell her story whether you want to listen to it or not. So that's how it gets experienced, but there are ways to respond. And on this whole thing of language matters. The words and terms we use about as we age, they're important. They message kind of the whole representation of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. They have a lot to say. Also, they kind of reveal a lot about the beliefs we hold. Once again, if we're saying things like, that older driver, that certainly reflects a lot. But also, if we use overuse terms like seniors, for example, that says a lot, I think, about what we believe. And we do a lot of presentations with media, with healthcare, and, for example, behavioral healthcare. They all have these guides that are supposed to dictate the language they use around older people. For example, here's a guide with the American Medical Association, and they're telling doctors and nurses and so on that what ageism is. And then they're also saying certain terms like seniors, elderly, the aged, whatever. They're not the language that you should be using when you're serving somebody as a medical person, and also just avoid this whole othering. So that's really important. And then they're recommending use terms like older persons, older people, older adults, and so on. And I just want to be clear, this isn't about political correctness, okay? This is based on hard research that has been conducted by a national social research organization called the Frameworks Institute. They did all this hard research a few years ago where they're trying to understand what Americans think about older people and aging, and then how we can help them move away from stereotypical and unproductive views. And, they learned a lot about what people think about aging. And for example, we in America, we don't think ageism is a real thing. Or if we do believe that ageism exists, then it doesn't really impact people that much, okay? We also believe that problems of aging are the responsibility of the person. In other words, it's not a systemic thing. So, and we get that a lot in the legislature. If in terms of services and things like that, legislators will say, for example, well, where's the family? Why do we need government support? Or the person should have saved better, should have put more money aside, not appreciating that sometimes things go south pretty unexpectedly. So those are some of the beliefs. But the other thing that they learned, once again, in the research is that terms like, you see it right in front of you, senior citizens, elders, seniors are seen as less competent by people on the street, so to speak, who are interviewed, and older, okay? So that's the connotation. If you call people older adults, the connotation is that you're more competent and younger. So even when you market things like, I'm a big runner, and there's this, organization, it used to be the Senior Olympics, called the Senior Games, okay? So, it's interesting because, number one, I don't identify as a senior, so I wouldn't participate in the events. But also, it's interesting because the mission is for people 45 and over to be healthy, okay? So when you call it Senior Games, you're not getting maybe at a group that would really benefit from it. And maybe just to try this out a little bit, because we found that a lot of people, when we ask them, like, what would you like to be called in the last third of your life? We give the thing none of the above, because a lot of times people, as we age, we don't like any of the terms, okay? But I'm curious, anybody want to share like what they'd like to be called? Look at that, I got one already. So. Boss, yes. We recently had a lot of press over our campaign to end ageism in Granby. somebody wrote in, I don't care what you call me as long as you call me, meaning that they wanted to be involved in the campaign on ageism, and but what they were called was secondary. So yeah, I think you guys are fooling with me. So, but that's all right. So it's that time of night where, yeah, and I often get none of the above when we ask this, but it's an interesting thing to think about. We also need to make it very clear, because we started out with that wonderful what you said about the land we're operating on, is that there are a lot of groups that revere the term elder, and that's what they prefer. And so that's a lot of it about language, is like making sure you know what people would like to be called. And I've heard, and sometimes like, just call me by my name. When in doubt, call me by my name and stuff. So it's an interesting thing. So, you know, second. One of the things we talked about, one of the things Kelly and I talked about earlier, is that we don't want to keep you beyond your time. So we're kind of getting to the end of the time, and maybe a little recap about kind of what we believe in the Power in Aging project. You know, we can learn more about our own age bias and avoid acting on it. We can embrace age positive beliefs about growing older, and we can listen for those negative age stereotypes and shift those to positive. And yeah, and it really does start with us, right? I mean, what if we changed our perspective about our own aging and embrace this view of age positive? What if we dumped those stereotypes about older people? You know, you've been so open and so generous in your sharing, I should say tonight, right? So, but I would like to end with inviting you to join our age positive movement. At the beginning, you know, I put out the link for the Power in Aging project and the Maine Council on Aging website. I mean, you can go to that link and you'll find this thing about the age positive movement. There's a lot of good resources there. So go to our website and take the pledge. You know, we've started this movement, and one of the things that we're asking people to do is to take the pledge here about joining the age positive Maine movement. You know, standing for a Maine that is age equitable, where all people of all ages are seen as, and so on and so forth. So kind of take the pledge, learn more. You know, I'm going to follow up anyone who's interested. We have these action guides about language and about things you can do if you're in an organization or a community or individual actions you can take. And for example, here's actions that we have on our age positive site, you know, and we've talked about some of them today. Some people write letters to the editor. There are some pretty stereotypical things that still exist in the newspapers, for example, even though we've been out and talked to media. And some people write some pretty blistering letters to the editors. So that's good. It's calling people out. So so in our limited time together, I hope you came out of today with a little bit better awareness of ageism and its impacts and actions that you could be taking starting today to address ageism in yourself and others. Hopefully you learned a little bit about age positivity. We will forward all the things that I talked about in the slide deck. So any questions? We've got 5 minutes maybe. Any questions? You can come off your mute.
Hi. Hi,
And
this
by
is
the way,
Judy Lauren.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I do kind of have a question and a comment, which is a lot of the stereotypes of older people are something that, as you've talked about, because we believe in them ourselves, we kind of play into. So how do we avoid perpetuating a stereotype when we interact with others?
Well, as I was mentioning, it starts with sensitizing yourself and dealing with your own internalized ageism. A lot of reflection, a lot of work, being curious, about how you're impacting people, being open. I mean, I've had my wife call me out before, it's that whole thing of the growth mindset, if you are sensitive to it. But with all the stuff we're doing, what we're finding is that the more people become aware, the more they see it, the more they can name it, and then they can take steps, to disrupt it. But I think a lot of it is just being much more sensitized to the presence of it, and just responding to it. So we also have a kind of a new presentation that we do that's all about disrupting ageism. So it really takes the assumption that people have been exposed to what ageism is and its impacts and all that kind of stuff. What I call the ageism 101. But then the disrupting thing that we do, and certainly would love to do another one. We'd have to do it in person probably, but it's all role playing and being put into scenarios and situations and sort of seeing and naming examples of ageism. But then, because what we've learned is people literally want scripts. They want recommendations about what you say and how you respond to things. And I'll send you this guide. We have this guide called Tips and Techniques for Disrupting Ageism. But a lot of it is by role playing and practicing that out. So that's something we can certainly do, Kelly, somewhere down the road in person if people have any interest. Yeah. So the stats say people with the right attitude live 7.5 years longer. But do they live longer because they have the right attitude, or does the right attitude follow the fact that they are healthier and live longer? That's a really good question. The research it's really good research, and it's done by a woman named Becca Levy, who is based at, I think, Yale. Obviously there's a combination of both things, but they as we used to say in research, you never use the word prove, but it supports that the right attitude does make people live healthier and live longer. So it's really, people don't necessarily develop the attitude after the fact that they're healthier and live longer. So the attitude has a lot to do with healthier and living longer. So. And I can share that research if anybody is interested in it. It was actually included in the World Health Organization study. Okay, so I'll send you my email address right now, because I go to companies I do age positive workplace things. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly. Yeah.
So I'll just add for those people who are interested in contacting you, you can certainly put it in the chat, but I will make sure, if I have your permission, Don, I'll make sure that I get that information out to people when I send out the attachments to your slides.
Okay.
And I'll also probably as soon as the recording is ready, which is as soon as I get around, as soon as I get to it, which will be tomorrow or sometime this week, I will send out to this group, to anybody who's registered, the link to the recording so that you can spread that to friends and share it with people. And also your attachment, and I'll include your email address if that's okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think what's interesting for me, Don, is that it's really an adjustment in the way I think about about aging, and that's fighting years, right? I mean, of
Yeah.
kind of this attitude being drilled into me that younger is better, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting, and I think we all have to change our attitude, but I think that's difficult to do. I think it's difficult to you know to change the attitude, to not make it a negative, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult. And I mean, I've been tested. I'm biased toward youth, you know, and I work in the aging field, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
we're swimming against a lot of current. But it is true, though, once you become just a little bit more aware, you start moving toward a higher level of sensitivity. It can almost be a curse some days, of course, because you start seeing it, and you start seeing it in yourself. But you can start working on it, But it is swimming against the current. But getting in the water is the first step.
I have a friend who is here tonight, actually, and she told me that she told me a few years ago that she was trying to change her attitude about winter, and that she used to hate winter, but she was going to learn to love it, and I kind of took on that attitude too, like, I'm going to try and learn to love winter, and I've grown to love winter for the things that it brings, and I think we can think of this in the same way, that aging brings some positives.
Yes.
And if we focus on the positive, then so much the better.
Yeah, absolutely. In my Catholic Charities work, I used to do a lot of parish workshops on aging. I was talking about the blessings of aging. So, but we have to see it.
Yes, opening your eyes, that's the biggest, the first step, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Don, for spending your time with us tonight and sharing your views and your knowledge. It's going to be interesting, I think, to go forth and and pay closer attention. So so I appreciate that.
And thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I appreciate it. And you'll always go down in history as the first library presentation. See, there you go.
I like that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I will be in touch with contact information and slide attachments.
Yeah.
And with that, we bid you good night.
Cool. All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.